Trigger warning. This podcast is about grief. Whether you are newly bereaved or whether you have been stuck in grief for years, I do hope this podcast brings you some comfort. Grief is such a universal experience, but we all do it differently. This podcast is not about fixing you or forcing the healing process, because there is no cure for grief. It can only be absorbed, experienced, loved and cared for. So whether you are doing it privately behind closed doors, or like me, you are kicking and screaming your way through, let's support each other. This is a safe space where we can come together and share experiences. My hope is that this podcast shines a light on your path and gives you the strength to navigate your way through the grieving process. My name is Louise Bates, and I'm so pleased we connected. I'm looking forward to interviewing people who have also walked this path to find out what worked for them, in the hope that it helps you too. I'm sending you so much love and support, and I look forward to sharing this crazy journey with you. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Gift for Grief. And today I am delighted to have Andy Smith as my guest. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you.
Now, Andy, you are a musician, a singer and a songwriter. You are also an author, and I have read your 3 books. But today we're remembering your wife, Helen, who sadly died of cancer when she was 56. So perhaps we could start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Thank you for having me, by the way.
You're very welcome.
I'm 67 years old.
No.
Sorry, I know you're supposed to say you don't look it. But I am. I married Helen in 1986 we met in 1983, and it was as close to love at first sight as you could get. And we had 33 years of beautiful marriage, and which I'm very grateful for, you know.
Yeah.
And
well, I've read your 3 books and I know your story. But could you share with us a little bit about Helen and what she was like?
Helen was very funny. She was a very quiet person. When I first met her, she didn't really know what to say to my friends and family. But luckily, she could always talk to me. And so we always had that attachment.
Yeah.
But she was very sweet. She was very pretty. She was very, very quiet. She was a very caring person. My friends all fell in love with her because she lived in Manchester when I met her.
Yeah.
She was a student up there, and I was living in Rugby. And so yes, she used to come probably every fortnight, or I used to go to Oldham or Manchester and see her. But yeah, she was very artistic. Helen was an illustrator when she was 4 years old. She read an Enid Blyton book and saw the pictures and decided that when she grew up, that was the job she wanted to do, and that was the job she did. So,
yeah.
You know.
Well, your books are like a love story. Your first one is called 12 Months and Counting, a true story of love, loss, grief and hope. And then you wrote Good Grief and Other Poems. And I love this because it actually has Helen's artwork in.
It does, yes.
Amazing.
When she was alive, we were going to write some children's books. And we actually did write a few stories, but back in those days, self-publishing wasn't really happening.
No.
And we never did anything with them. Funny enough, I found them in the loft a few weeks ago, these things. And so when I wrote the poetry book, it seemed a little bit... It's a sad book, obviously, because a lot of it is grief-related.
Yeah.
And I thought it needed something to lighten it a little bit. Most of Helen's works was children's books, and so most of the pictures were never going to really fit with a grief book. But I did find a few little bits that I thought were, fitting.
I think they illustrate the book beautifully.
Yeah, and it just made it a joint effort, which seemed to make it more important, really.
It's a fantastic legacy for Helen as well, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I still like it when I go into a bookshop and can find one of the books that she drew, and it's a great legacy for the grandchildren because, they read the books that she's done the pictures to.
Yeah.
Which,
But your books are like a love story and Still a Way to Go, an autobiography. That's your latest book.
Yes, I wrote that last year.
Because you were so devoted to each other and you shared this wonderful marriage and life together, When did Helen realise that she had a serious health issue?
She'd always had a few problems, but she went and had an examination, and they found a cyst on her ovaries, on her womb, and they decided that the age she was, that it was probably best to just do a hysterectomy and get it all sorted. So there was no worries about it. She just went in for a hysterectomy operation. They didn't think there'd be any issues. It was a very long operation, but when she went for a 6-week checkup afterwards, they'd sent her samples away for biopsies, and it came back that she'd got some clear cell cancer.
Okay.
Which was a big shock.
Yeah.
It wasn't. We weren't expecting that. So they recommended that they did a dose of chemotherapy.
Yeah.
This was in 2016, which was the year our daughter was getting married. So when our daughter got married, Helen was actually halfway through a chemotherapy course.
Wow.
In fact, they planned the wedding around the dates so that she would be not too bad at the wedding. But so she had that, and at the end of it was a success. And it was successful for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then it came back with a vengeance, and it had spread into her lungs, liver, lymph glands. And so they recommended another dose of chemotherapy, but they did say at that point, this is palliative treatment now. This is... He's good as said, you're not going to have a happy ever after. It's you aren't going to be old and grey together. But they did say probably he'll get 5 years, which, if you'd said that to me, 2 years beforehand, I'd have said that's ridiculous. But 5 years almost seemed like a bit of a gift, really.
Okay. It's such a cruel disease, isn't it?
It's a frightening one, the ovarian cancer, because, funnily enough, they did diagnose it quite early, with it being found when she was operated on.
Yeah.
So, which is why she probably got an extra 2 years.
Yeah. But when a loved one is facing a serious health issue, it presents unique challenges for the people closest to them, doesn't it? As we both know. Now, I talk about anticipatory grief quite a lot on my podcast, and this type of grief occurs when a loved one has been diagnosed with a terminal illness or even something like dementia. We begin to mourn the gradual loss of them as the disease progresses. And each stage of the illness takes a little bit more of them away from us, causing us to grieve in advance of their death. So that's why it's called anticipatory grief. But this doesn't make our grief any easier when they die, does it? How did you and your family cope during Helen's illness?
My way of coping was to go into denial. I just wouldn't accept that she was dying. And I knew she was.
Yeah.
And the family, and Helen in particular, used to say to me, you have got to accept this. It's I am going to die.
Yeah.
But what it did do, it gave us an almost normal life.
Yeah.
Up to her dying, although it was always in the background.
Yeah.
But because Helen didn't like talking about it anyway, she didn't talk about her impending death to anybody.
No.
Not me, her best friends, anyone. So to an outside world, we probably looked like just a normal couple,
Yeah.
And I think if I hadn't gone into denial, I think I'd have been falling apart every day of the week, and that wouldn't have been good for Helen.
So denial was like a survival mechanism.
It was
for
completely
you, wasn't it?
survival. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It probably made it worse when during the last week, when I thought suddenly I had to accept
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
this was going to happen.
But I suppose with you being in denial, you were the best person you could be to support Helen through that. Because if you'd have fallen apart and you wouldn't have been there for her as much. So in a way, it's a positive.
I think so. Yeah, I think the fact that I wouldn't accept it, I carried on as normal. I was still doing my gigs, and we were still going out for meals with friends and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, it worked for us.
Yeah.
Let's put it like that. I think it was the right way to do it for us, because, like I say, Helen didn't want to talk about dying.
Yeah.
And Helen didn't go into denial. She just went into Helen just was... Her Kindle book is quite interesting. List of books is quite interesting, because they're all books about how to live longer with cancer. There's no books about death, which I found quite interesting when I looked through that list.
And I think everybody finds their own way, don't they, to deal with the situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Now, I've had a few people say to me, at least you had time to say goodbye. And I really struggle with that because it sounds like I should be grateful that it was a good thing that there was a long illness and suffering was involved. So, it's like, are they saying it's better if somebody goes quick?
Exactly, yeah. I don't,
there's no good way to lose somebody, is
we
there?
didn't actually ever say goodbye.
Okay.
We didn't really do that. Like I say, we just carried on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even when she was taken into hospital, when she had a blood clot in her leg,
Yeah.
I never thought that was, she was always going to come home. I always thought she'd come home again.
Yeah.
I didn't think 2 weeks later that she'd be dead.
Yeah. You just can't comprehend that, can
No,
you?
it's too big.
It's too much.
It's too big, yeah.
So-
I don't think you don't do it consciously. You just, something in the back of your head just doesn't let you.
Yeah, it is a survival mechanism, a mode that you go into to help you get through such an awful time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Helen died in August 2019. Can you remember what those first weeks and months felt like after her death?
They were awful.
Yeah.
They were absolutely awful. I mean, thank God I had family and friends who all stepped up to the mark. It was, although we knew she was going to die, and even in the last week, I imagined what life would be like without her. But I never imagined quite how awful it was going to be, you know?
You just can't see it, can you?
You can't. I mean, I'd lost my dad in 2017, and I didn't handle that grief particularly well. But when Helen died, it was a completely different sort of grief because she'd been there by my side for nearly 40 years, and it was.
Yeah. Well, you were so devoted to each other, and
We
that
were.
comes across in your books. Yeah. You can see, but just after you have a significant loss, I think there's this numb feeling. I remember when Matthew died, thinking, why don't I feel worse than this? And it was almost like a numb. Again, it's a coping mechanism because when you've had a massive loss, you have this massive emotional experience and it's just too much to feel.
I think so, yeah.
So I think sort of it leads to a sense of emotional detachment and there's a numbness that's there at the beginning. And it serves as a protective barrier, allowing us to navigate through the pain and grief in order to survive. So again, it's a survival mechanism and it's a normal part of the grieving process. But what helps you navigate yourself through this journey? Did you have any counselling or did you have another resource that helped you?
I went to counselling. Mighton Hospice offer counselling to family and even to friends. And I knew that it would help me.
Yeah.
I knew because I wanted to talk to somebody about it, and I couldn't talk to my children because obviously they were going through the same sort of thing as I was. It was just a little bit too raw. So I think it was after 6 weeks it was recommended to leave a little gap because obviously you got the funeral to plan and everything.
Yeah.
And I went to counselling and it did help. I mean, it was at the end of it you'd feel absolutely drained, but it did. And when it finished, it was like I really missed going. Yeah.
I
really missed going.
I think it's interesting because in counselling they like to leave a little bit of a space because they're aware that there is this numbness.
Yes.
And I think you need to be able to start feeling it in order to heal it.
Yeah.
So that I think there's a reason why they leave a space as well. It's like I say, it's a busy period because you've got the funeral
It is,
and everything else.
And to be honest, that was a great help. I mean,
yeah.
I sort of went into overdrive on planning the funeral and sorting out a website that the funeral director set up. So I started raising money for the hospice immediately on that.
Yeah.
And so it was, it gave me something to do.
Yeah.
And so when I started after the funeral had finished, I think that's when it really hits you even more.
Yeah.
Because they really are gone then.
Yeah.
I couldn't go and visit her at the funeral home or anymore,
Yeah.
So, so counselling just happened at the right time. And it doesn't solve anything, but it makes you understand the reason you're feeling like you are, I think.
Yeah, it helps you to understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to become stuck, isn't it? And I think
It is.
counselling, therapy, anything that helps you to sort of move forward is a good thing.
And because I was very angry, I was very angry that
Yeah.
that she'd died.
Yeah. Who were you angry with?
Anything,
Yeah.
anybody. I suppose God was my biggest target.
Yeah.
I shouted at God a lot. I needed somebody to take my anger out on, really.
Absolutely.
And luckily, I didn't take it out on people I love, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
probably said some things that I shouldn't say sometimes. But
Don't we all?
yes.
And I think you're allowed to when you're going through a grief experience like that. Now, it's hard to find the right words to say when passing on condolences, and some of my guests do not appreciate the phrase, "I'm sorry for your loss." I find this okay, but I know a lot of people don't. But what I don't like is when people completely ignore the grief and just don't acknowledge it.
Yes.
So I think when people say, "I'm sorry for your loss," it's better than just completely ignoring it. Can you recall any comforting words that people shared with you when expressing their condolences?
I think friends in particular struggled,
Yeah.
partly because Helen was quite young, and there must have also been the feeling of, there but the grace of God, it could be
Yeah.
any of us. So I think they did all struggle a little bit, and I wasn't the easiest person to be with at that point. Partly because we had so many good friends, but they were all couples, and all of a sudden they would invite me around for meals or arrange for us all to go out for a drink or whatever. But I was always the odd number, and I think that's what I found really hard. So they didn't offer sort of like words. It was more, they did it more in gestures, and if I wanted to talk, they'd talk.
Yeah.
But I agree with you on the one about "I'm sorry for your loss," which is what you say to people at funerals, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if people did say it, I was sometimes quite blunt, and I'd say, "She's not lost.
That's, yeah.
She was stolen,"
Yeah.
and that was, probably wasn't a very kind thing to say, but it was.
But it's understandable.
Yes, yeah.
But I think it's just because people don't know how to engage in the subject.
They don't.
Because we avoid it, don't we?
Yes, and its early days, that was
Yeah.
that was another one that gets rolled out. But they are things. I mean, I'm probably as guilty as the next person for saying it if I go to a funeral.
Yeah. I think unless you go through a loss like this, you don't know that yourself, do you? So we've probably all said these things in the past, and
We have.
And I think as long as the intention behind it is good, that's probably the best way to look at it. They want to acknowledge it in some way, and they don't know what else to say, so it sounds clumsy and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they were, everyone was absolutely brilliant, I have to say,
That's good.
But yeah, they took me under their wing and looked after
So
me.
you felt well supported.
I felt very well supported. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear,
Which
Andy.
I think Helen always knew I would be.
Yeah.
Which made it probably a little bit easier for her.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, I read in one of your books that not long after Helen's death, you were crossing the road and someone said, "Cheer up, mate, nobody's died."
They did, yes.
Don't people say the clumsiest things sometimes?
They do, and in fairness, he was obviously saying it jokingly. And I had got nothing to smile about, and I was just going to go and buy a sandwich, and I was concentrating on crossing the road as well.
Yeah.
But it seemed like a funny. I mean, at the time,
Yeah.
it didn't annoy me. I just thought, well, yeah, somebody has died.
Yeah, yeah.
And I did want to tell him, which,
Yeah, yeah. Well, someone said to me once, "Well, at least you have another child." It's like, that's a bit clumsy.
yes.
But anyway, how would you describe grief to someone who has never had a significant loss?
I'd say it's the worst feeling imaginable. It's it's a tunnel with no light at the end, which of course there is, but in those first few months you can't see it.
Yeah.
I think it's like grief inhabits the space where Helen used to be.
Yeah.
Every thought I have of Helen is grief related.
Yeah.
At that point. So yeah, it was very difficult. Like I say, it was very different to the one after Dad died. It was it was unique, and I think, like you said before, you try and imagine what it would be like, and it was nothing like I imagined it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you believe that grief has changed you in any way?
I think it probably has. Yeah. I think I'm more empathetic now.
Yeah.
What I find important in life is completely changed. I value things much more, which I just didn't appreciate before, you know. So it has changed me. It's also changed my attitude towards death as well.
Yeah.
I'm not scared of death anymore because Helen's been there and done it, you know. So that was quite a weird one. That I suddenly thought, I'm not scared of death now, you know. So it did change me. So I think some things for the better, some things for the worse. I'm probably quite selfish now. I don't do things to please other people.
I think that's a good thing.
It probably is, you know. But
I think the word selfish has sort of a negative connotation to it, but I think being selfish is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if something's planned and on the day I just can't face it, you know, but I don't make an excuse now. I will just say, I'm having a bad day.
Yeah.
And you really wouldn't want my company tonight. And invariably they'll say, well, we'll cheer you up. And I say, well, you probably won't, you know.
You need that self-care.
Yes.
That is self-care, isn't it? That's looking after you.
It's being lonely, but the only person who can actually fill that loneliness would be Helen.
Yeah.
Nobody else can actually fill that gap, you know.
So can you recommend any books apart from your own?
Of course.
Obviously, top of the list. So any books, any films or any groups to support people going through grief and things that supported you?
I really enjoyed, if enjoyed is probably the wrong word, a book by Sasha Bates called Language of Loss. I don't know if you've ever read it.
No, I haven't.
She's a psychotherapist and her husband died very suddenly. And obviously she dealt with people with grief, but she suddenly realised that it was very different when it happened to you personally. And so she wrote what is a very personal book. And that was probably more than any book I sort of appreciated. A few friends, including my children, suggested that I watch Afterlife.
Oh,
on
it's
Netflix,
amazing.
And I said, do I really want to watch a programme about a man whose wife dies of cancer, you know? And they said, yeah, give it a go, Dad, because you will laugh and you will try, you know? And I did both things. But he just was very tuned in to, I'd watch it and think, I know exactly what you mean, and I know why you're being rude, and I know why you're saying that, and that was just incredible. I was really surprised because I'm not the biggest Ricky Gervais fan, but it changed my views on him really. You know?
And I'm the same. I wasn't a massive Ricky Gervais fan, but watching Afterlife, I cried and I laughed, and I just got it. I thought,
exactly. I think
he's captured it perfectly, hasn't he?
And just having the dog there and things like that as well. It was just, he was lovely, you know.
Yeah.
And there was another book which was written by Ray Owen, which is called Facing the Storm, which is another. It's got sort of lots of little tasks for you to do in it.
Oh, that's good.
Which is quite good. I didn't use it so much after Helen's death, but I did use it after my dad's death, and it was really useful.
Well, I'll add those books into the show notes so people can check them out.
In fact, my son-in-law, who's a clinical psychologist, he recommended that one to me.
Yeah.
And it's a very good book as well. But The Language of Loss just was very, very personal, and I think that's what I liked about it so much.
Yeah. Well, I've not heard of those books, so I'll personally be very interested.
I think she's written a couple of books, actually.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Andy, what words of wisdom could you share with our listeners who are grieving? Just something to help maybe them loosen their grief in some way.
I think to remember the good times, but not dwell on the things you didn't do and the things you didn't say, which is what you tend to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important to remember all the beautiful times. So that would probably be my main one. And I don't, like you said, there isn't it's fine to be selfish.
Yeah.
And I think be selfish. I made loads of mistakes, and you don't know. You've not walked that path before. I've never lost a wife before, so you make mistakes. And I found for me, actually doing things like raising money for the hospice, I was doing as much for me as for the charities and stuff like that, because it made me feel better, and it gave my life a purpose.
It's like therapy, isn't it? And you've raised a lot of money.
We've done very well. People people's kindness has raised the money.
Yeah.
You know, who've bought the books and bought the CDs and done. You know, every gig I do,
Yeah.
I have a collection plate at the end of it. So if you're not buying the books, you're not buying the CDs, at least give me some money.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any idea how much you've raised?
I know it's over the £10,000 mark now.
That's amazing.
So I split. Most of the money goes to the hospice, but I also raise money for target ovarian cancer. So they get a handout as well. So yeah. And I tend to do it that they get all the money. So on the books, I pay for the printing, and the CDs I pay for the pressing. That's my contribution. So every penny gets donated to the charity. If it was a million seller, I'd be bankrupt. But
Well, I think it's amazing what you're doing, honestly. So has it been 6 years now since Helen?
It's 6 years in August. Yeah,
6 years in August.
Only last week did I start saying it's 6 years in August. It's always 5 years last August, but it's getting closer to August. So now I'm saying it's 6 years this year.
Yeah.
You know.
So where would you say you are in your grief journey now?
I'd say it's probably plateaued.
Yeah.
I control it now rather than it controlling me, I think.
Yeah.
I use it as a cloak. It's a friend now. It's sort of like, without the grief, a part of Helen would go.
Yeah.
You know, she is part of that package. You know, Helen's part of the grief package. So I look upon it with some affection now.
I totally get that.
And it's going to be there forever, and I don't want it not to be.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I want Helen to still be there, and the grief keeps it there. So so I think there are days where you just can't handle things, but I mean, I will wake up some mornings and say, right, today we blank out, and I go off the radar for 24 hours, and the next day I'll feel a lot better. It's like I've had new batteries put in. You know?
Yeah. So do you believe that grief has given you any positive aspects to your life?
I wish it had given me Helen's gift of art.
Okay.
Because when I'm asked to draw a Minecraft character or a unicorn for one of my grandchildren, I think, Helen, where are you? So I wish I'd been given that gift. I think I've been the fact that I've been writing books. I'd never have written a book before, so that, I suppose, is a gift, really. Yeah.
Did you find that writing helped you as well process your experience?
Completely. I mean, there was one of the things when I had the counselling, she knew I wrote songs. She said, why don't you write down letters or whatever to Helen? And I would do that. And then I'd write them, and I suppose it's vain, really. And I think, that's actually quite nice. And I'd post them on Facebook. And I used to get some amazing responses to it. And that's why the first book was written, because I decided after a year I'm going to stop doing this or not do it so often. And people were quite upset when I said I'm not doing it. And then I thought, well, I could actually make a book of this.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm 12 months on now. And I read the book last week, actually. I hadn't read it for ages. Yeah. So before I came to see you, I thought, I'm going to read the book again. And it made me realise how much I have moved on.
Yes.
Since, I wouldn't change any of it because that's how I felt.
Yes,
after
absolutely.
12 months. But there's a few things I wouldn't probably do, write now if I did it. So
yeah. Well, I think journaling is a really helpful tool to help people to get stuff out of their heads onto paper. It can be used as like a healing tool to help them move forward. So what you've done is a type of journaling. And like you say, it's good to look back on it because you can see how far you've come.
Yes.
Because you can forget. I know you can't truly forget the whole experience, but little aspects of it, you can look back and go, oh gosh, yeah, I remember that. And not only by you sharing your experience, other people reading that, it will help them as well, making them feel sort of less alone. So
I think it's nice. I've had emails from people who've bought the book who don't know me and said it's been a help. And I think it's lovely when you get an email like that.
Yeah.
And I got an email from a lady who said, I live in Cornwall now, but I was one of the nurses at the hospice. Oh. Well, I remember Helen. She actually remembered her. I mean, she must have dealt with hundreds of people. Yeah. But she remembered Helen, she remembered our family.
Yeah, isn't that lovely? That's so nice. So what would you like people to learn from your grief experience?
That it's not a bad thing, There isn't a right or a wrong in anything you do. Grief for me now is a help. you know.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it's there, you know. So
Yeah.
I think I'd like people to learn that. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel, you know.
Yeah.
I think you have to realise life will never be the same again. It might never be quite as good, but it can still be good,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I have a lovely life. I'm very, very lucky. I'm surrounded by people who love me. I've got 4 amazing grandchildren.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. In fact, a friend of mine sent me a message, and they just finished the autobiography. And they said, it might seem a strange thing to say, but you've had a very blessed life.
Yes.
And they're right, I have, you know.
And it's good to focus on that, isn't it?
Isn't it just, yeah.
And there
yeah.
may be days where you don't want to focus on that. You want to feel that grief
Yeah,
and wrap yourself in that. And you need to do that for however long you need to do that. But then those good memories and thinking about the positive side of your life can bring you back out again.
yeah.
And I think that's the grief journey, isn't it? Sort of ebbs and wanes, and just allow yourself to feel what you feel.
I know Helen would want me to, you know, carry on. And,
Yes.
You know, she didn't have a choice. I've got a choice, you know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know.
That's a good way of looking at it. So do you have any special ways to remember Helen? Any family rituals?
I do loads of things.
Do you?
I speak to, she's the first person I speak to in the morning, and she's the last person I speak to at the end of the day, and I speak a lot to her during the day. I go to the cemetery probably a little bit too often, but it's a 10-minute walk from our house, so it's my bit of exercise. So I like doing that. The family do come. We always used to go on birthdays and special occasions as a big family gathering. It was always a little bit emotional.
Yeah.
So we prefer to all do it individually now.
Yeah, yeah.
Which really works. So there's loads of photos in the house, and you know I've got loads of videos of her. You know, and I think that's the beauty of the modern world. That's you know in many ways I can watch something and it's like she's still there. You know, and
Helen's still part of your life, isn't she?
well, she is. Yeah. She's still my wife. You know, and
Yes.
I always say to people, you know, Helen's still my wife. You know,
Yeah.
it's.
I think that's lovely. So, Andy, what are your thoughts about the afterlife?
If I didn't believe in something, I'd really struggle.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see Helen in the little tight jeans and a favourite top, but that's not going to happen. I think it's going to be something far more spiritual, probably and equally beautiful. I had a sort of like a church background as a child, and so I think that's bound to influence your thoughts a bit. But I don't look upon it as like a heaven and hell thing. I don't think there's any need for a God inclusion in it, really. I think, you know, there can be an afterlife without, you know, without a God.
Yeah.
And so we always said that we'd love to each other for eternity, and I always think I'll see her again. And I'd struggle if I didn't think that.
Yeah, yeah. So do you believe our loved ones can give us signs?
I do, yeah. I think when Helen first died, I was seeing lots of things which I thought were signs. I think because you want to, don't you?
Yeah.
And every little thing that was happening, and a lot of them are in the first book, and I read them down. I'm a bit embarrassed by some of them, but actually,
No, don't be embarrassed. I love it.
At the time, they just seemed so. But now I do still know she's there sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, I can be, and they used to be things used to happen on occasions when I was really sad or down, or I was asking her for a sign, and then something would happen, you'd think, oh, that's a sign.
Yeah.
Now I can just be cooking a meal, even driving in the car or walking along the road in a time when I'm relaxed, probably, and I suddenly know she's there,
Yeah.
and I'll go, hello darling, you know.
Oh. So you find that it's in times when you're at peace or
Yes,
content?
I think differently now. It's when I'm sort of probably relaxed, and you know, and it's, you know, and it's almost like, I'm certain you're there. You know?
Yeah, you can feel it.
Yeah.
So, if you could give Helen a message now, what would you say?
I'd tell her I still love her as much as I did on our wedding day.
Oh. She would be so proud of everything that you've done.
I miss her more than any word I could write in any book or any song.
Yeah.
I'd tell her the grandchildren still talk about her.
Yeah.
Which is lovely, and ask questions about her, which is really nice. She's so I'd tell her that she's a big part of their lives, even though she's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her spirit lives on in your family.
Yeah. I'd also tell her that she was right when she said that she was glad that she was dying before me, because she did.
Oh,
Because she said, I wouldn't want to be the one that's left. And having been through the process of grief and losing her, I feel like I protected her from that.
yeah.
That she hasn't had to go through, what I've had to go through.
Yeah.
And so that's probably a positive out of it, really. Yeah.
Oh, Andy, that's perfect. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. It's been nice to talk to you.
You've been amazing. Thank you for sharing your story and for being open and honest. I'm pleased that this episode is helping to keep Helen's memory alive. I wish I'd met her. I feel like I have after reading your books. I feel like I got to know the person. And I'm sure she's very proud of everything that you've done now and all the money that you've raised as well. Where can people get copies of your books and how can people get in touch with you?
The books are available on Amazon. I think you said at the beginning what the were called, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
They're available on Amazon or directly through me, which can be got from either my website, which is andysmithmusician.com,
Yeah.
or just email me on andysmith1758@hotmail.co.uk, and we can take it from there.
Fab. And I will put these links in the show notes
Thank you.
as well.
Thank you.
So, Andy, as you are a singer and a songwriter, I can't let you go without hearing one of your songs. And I would love to finish this episode with Helen's song. I know you wrote many songs for Helen, but could you introduce this song and explain why you've chosen this particular one?
Yes, I think because obviously lots of songs I wrote for her in our early days before we got married, and they're lovely love songs. But this one was written well into our marriage. In fact, there's mention, I think she'd gone away for a weekend to her mum's with the kids.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote it then, and it's just like, it shows a love which is still as strong, and so yeah, I always like this one. And Helen, I don't write many up-tempo songs, and so this was a bit of a change for me, really. So.
Oh, well, this is Helen's song. Thank you, Andy.
Another hour, another day, time will fly, I've heard them say, the days apart makes the week seem longer. The summer of my life will keep me warm, will help to guide me through the storm. I've loved before, but this time stronger. And if I ever let you down, don't despise me. Take me home and soon you'll find you still excite me. Long before the dawn shines through, you'll know that I love only you, and only you can make me happy. The ones I love still love me too, despite the storms that we've been through. We've give and take, we've come out smiling. So let's make a toast to what's to come, to what is now, and what is done. For what will be, there is no telling. And if I ever let you down, don't despise me. Take me home and soon you'll find you still excite me. Long before the dawn shines through, you'll know that I love only you, and only you could make me happy. And I'll be with you night and day, never more than touch away. Such a lucky man with you beside me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Gift for Grief. Please feel free to share it with your friends and family, and let's encourage others to become more grief literate. If you're struggling with your grief or worried about your mental health, please do speak to your doctor. If you would like to join me on my social media groups, check out the show notes for all the links, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. The music on this podcast was written and recorded by Matthew Bates and can be found on his 2 albums, Fight Back and Kaleidoscope.